In a 2019 study, 25% of high schoolers reported vaping on a regular basis. This is 1 out of 4 teens in America. These are your friends, these are your siblings, these are the kids that you sit next to in English class. More and more reports have come out about vaping, stating the harmful effects. Today we are talking to Miss Shannon Mason and about vaping and teens. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your job at UPMC?
Yes. Well, I have been at UPMC for 23 years, and I am in my role currently. I am a certified health and wellness coach and certified tobacco treatment specialist, and I provide tobacco cessation intervention, education. And when I say intervention, that's to hopefully prevent someone um, from ever starting or help to prevent rather, or intervene in somebody who is a current active tobacco user, or for someone who's struggling with staying tobacco free or nicotine dependence. I don't want to say nicotine dependence free, but I would like to just be that person to walk with someone on their journey, regardless of where they're at, whether they are thinking about quitting a little bit, or if they quit and they just want that continued support to help them to stay quit.
So, how do you treat smokers within the healthcare community?
Okay. Within the healthcare community, we have to look at many different layers. A lot of the referrals that I do receive are like one on one. And with that one on one experience, we can actually kind of peel the layers, if you will, because a lot of the patients that I receive referrals from, sometimes they have other comorbidities or other diagnoses or other health issues that they're dealing with. And the tobacco use either antagonizes or pokes the bear, so to speak, causing some other health problems. So, how we help people who are referred in the healthcare setting is we kind of help, we first kind of get a baseline knowledge of where that person is, um, what their ultimate goal would be. Sometimes they want to just start off with cutting down, but usually it has to be a forward moving experience. It doesn't matter how fast they move forward. It's just that as long as they are interested in moving forward, um, the ultimate goal, of course, would be is to be free from nicotine, well, not nicotine, but tobacco. And I say nicotine only because we incorporating vaping in the tobacco talk, because vaping is actually viewed as a tobacco product, even though it's not a component of actual tobacco. Um, Federally, it's governed that way, meaning that vaping products have to have a house, so they house it under the topic of tobacco. So when you hear me say tobacco, it's not that I'm excluding vapors. I'm actually including vapors in that as well. But when you're helping someone who is a tobacco user or a vapor, it's very important to get some foundational information and then develop a plan that is custom tailored to their needs, because there's no specific algorithm or a plan that works for, it's not cookie cutter. And there's not one size fits all. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to spend some time and help that person do some unpeeling so they can learn about the triggers, focus on their motivation, assess their confidence, assess their support system, and then have to develop a plan. And mind you, that plan isn't concrete, meaning it's like you don't just develop that plan and say, okay, well, you got to stick with this. The plan changes as it needs to, depending upon the patient need and life experiences. Because things, whatever is going on right now, it could be different in 2 weeks. So therefore, there has to be a little bit of wiggle room to tweak a plan so it could work to the person's advantage in being successful.
What is the largest population of smokers versus the largest population of vapors?
Ooh, question. When you mean largest population, are you speaking in terms
Most
of
concentrated, like area or generation?
oh, generation? Well, I'll start with vapors for sure. Um, Vaping has totally skyrocketed in school age, um, mainly focusing on late middle school to early high school. That seems to be a very peak in a high peak in use for that age bracket for vaping. As far as tobacco is concerned, we've done a really good job with um, educating about the harm of tobacco. So youth rates are indeed down, and adult age use is still kind of hanging out because that was a generation that didn't have that same initial education that you guys had. I could honestly say I think we did really good with educating your generation as it relates to tobacco and the harm that it can cause. So, as for smoking, I believe the prevalence is a lot higher in the adult communities and upper ages. We're talking 40s and up. Um, but for vaping, it's a teenager around maybe low 20s. I'm not saying that above 20s, but if we're hitting a high prevalence, it's school age to low 20s. And then that's because social media and the marketing that has kind of like back when I was younger, when they could promote tobacco use on billboards and you had T-shirts and hats and just the marketing was very powerful for tobacco use back when I was a child. Hence why we have that generation of tobacco users today that's so prevalent. But to the flip of that, now we have vaping. The marketing is different and very strategic according to the times. Right now, social media is huge, so there's avenues of social media and very subliminal marketing. Um, it's a very strategic, concerted effort to connect with a certain age group and to indoctrinate a product. And right now, vaping is it, and there's so many different types of vaping. When we get that's a whole 2 3 hour seminar just talking about vaping. Yeah.
Do you think the don't smoke ads that the government puts out, you've probably seen them, the ones with the lady with the voice and like do
Uh,
you and those the truth about vaping, do you and smoking, do you think those are effective ways of curbing usage?
well, I think that type of marketing only speaks to a certain number of people. The one thing about nicotine dependence, we're talking about a true addiction. And when somebody is truly addicted, sometimes they don't always see something visual like that, or the graphic pictures, or even the commercials with a young lady with the stoma in her throat, and she's missing half of her jaw, and you know um, there's a connection. Sometimes it's a timing thing. I could really say is that um, that type of marketing doesn't work for everybody, but it will kind of impact a population. Um, and as for the kids, of course, kids are going to look at that and say, "Oh, that is really, some pretty harsh stuff," and it might make them prevention wise, maybe, think twice about ever starting. But somebody who was an active tobacco user, um, it can go either way. I've seen some people say, well, oh, that's not going to happen to me, because that's the blinders that are created in the addicted mind of somebody who is not yet ready. Um, just because somebody's interested in quitting doesn't mean that they're ready to quit. So somebody who has where that opening in their life comes to where they might look at that exact same commercial that they've seen before, and at that moment in their life, that same commercial just hits them in a different way. And I think that's the marketing that they do have. I don't frown upon it because it actually works for some people. Um, it scares some people, but there's some people where they are just so deeply rooted into their addiction that it doesn't really move them in the time that they're viewing it. And if anything, if they're watching it with family, they may look at it and become very defensive because sometimes the family will kind of speak about what they just saw and then I'll look at them and say, why do you? So then that puts the person who is the tobacco user in the room on the defensive. And that can create a pretty um, hostile um, moment. And then that can create, some negative energy, which isn't productive for, helping somebody to quit because it's different strokes, different folks. You can't approach every smoker or tobacco user or vapor the same way. You have to, you know, dialogue. It's about a conversation and not about somebody feeling threatened or guilted into quitting. And sometimes the conversations can move in that direction and it could be counterproductive.
Have you had personal experience where a smoker comes into your office and says, "I have seen one of those commercials. I like I think now is the time for me to quit."
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I've even had some individuals on the verge of tears, if not in tears, um, because when you're dealing with someone who is addicted, that means there is a overwhelming compulsion within them that the pendulum for them to continue seems to be so much bigger than the ability that they feel that they have to be able to be free from it. And when they meet with me, even though they may come like this, my goal is to hopefully, maybe not in one session, but in the create a shift to where, yes, even though that the barriers exist and yes, they are addicted, but they become more and more and more confident that they can actually be free from it. So, yes, to answer the question, I have met with people, talked with people that felt, I saw such and such commercial and it really, really has gotten to me. And I don't want that to be me, and so that's our starting point and that's our entry point in the conversation. We start there and I begin to, okay, so I'm glad that that is a motivator for you. So we don't focus on it completely, but we do keep it on the plate and we slide it to the side and said, okay, so let's get into problem solve mode now. Because sometimes they can look so much at what they're trying to prevent that they're not going to spend as much time on developing a plan to to, to help them to be successful at that not being the potentially an outcome for them if they embrace the power that they have within them. And that's the goal of a coach as an educator to, because they wouldn't come to me if they didn't want.
In the US, the FDA has banned flavored cigarettes with the exception of menthol cigarettes. Except this year they are in the process of being banned. What are your thoughts on this?
I am happy. I feel like it's taken too long um, for a ban to be on mentholated products. They've been around for a while. There are some populations that are targeted even more so with the mentholated products and have been for some time. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that when you think mentholated, you think of when you're feeling stuffy in your nose and or you feel congested. So you take a lozenge that has menthol in it. You have that lozenge, and that lozenge opens up your airways and that does exactly what it's supposed to do. And unfortunately, individuals who utilize the mentholated brand products seem to have a higher prevalence, or there seems to be statistics that support that those individuals who utilize those mentholated products have a higher risk of acquiring some of the tobacco related complications. Why? Because just like in that lozenge, the menthol that's in the tobacco product or the vaping or whatever product that we're talking about, tobacco related wise, um, when it's inhaled or ingested, what it's doing is it's opening up those airways just like it would if it was in a lozenge form. But all that stuff that's in the tobacco, the stuff that's in the vaping is getting deeper down in the bases, which therefore it's a recipe for seeding out all of the other health problems that can come down the line. I always say it's not if, it's just when. So the fact that we're closer and closer to mentholated products being banned altogether, we're a lot further than where I would like to be. I mean, I wish we could have been here a lot sooner. I guess that's what I'm saying. But I guess rather now than never. I'm grateful that it's still on the table. It's slow moving, but it's moving forward. So I'm actually very pleased to hear of the movement as of late in regards to flavorings and mentholated products.
Do you think flavored cigarettes have been banned, but do you think flavored vape pods should be banned?
Yes, and yes, and yes. Because I feel like the same thing applies. The flavorings draws a larger community because there's so many different types of flavors that that speak to children. With the epidemic being targeted at children, um, I think that that's a problem. You have these strawberry, French vanilla. You have these fruity flavors, and I think there's such a misconception um, with some of the education. People say, "Oh, well, at least it's not tobacco," and oh, it's just water vapor, and then you throw in, "Oh, well, and they smell so good." Banana. To me, that's just a recipe that will speak to a larger group to draw people in, because guess what? We're looking at the nicotine dependence that can be developed from these products. And I believe the lure or the draw uh, is the fruity flavors and those flavors that speak to children and that speak to young people who tend to gravitate to the candy flavored. Um, and before they know it, they become addicted. And why are they addicted? Why? Because of the nicotine content. The flavoring draws them in, but the nicotine tends to keep them locked in, and then they want more and more. And they don't even know why. It's not because of the fruity flavor. It's because of the nicotine that they keep coming back for the product. And before you know it, those products cost a lot of money. So guess what? If they can't afford that, then what will they turn to? They're going to turn to tobacco. They're going to turn to they can become smokers if they can't afford the vaping products at some point. And then you'll be looking at a dually addicted person, addicted to not only just the vaping products, but smoking when they can smoke, and vaping where they can vape. And ultimately, I think that is the goal of tobacco companies anymore. That they just having somebody addicted is confirmation that you're going to have a consumer coming and purchasing their product. So they're just birthing more consumers just in a different
That's very interest. That's very interesting. So what are some of the more health concerns that appear when you are a teen smoker, and then those that appear later as an adult smoker or vapor?
way. Well, there's a little bit difference in regards to the what can come from. Are you speaking health wise? Speaking
Yes.
health wise from being a smoker, and health wise from being a vapor. Um, we'll talk primarily about the lungs being the initial largest organ that receives the toxins, whether it's from smoking or vaping. The lungs work with the heart, and the lungs function is to get oxygenated blood working with the heart, because the heart is it pumps the blood. So the oxygen that the lungs let off, whatever's in the lungs, is getting seeded through the bloodstream to all different parts of the body. So ultimately, what you're looking at, and when we're talking about smoking, because mind you, we've been researching tobacco use for a very long time. So we know a whole lot about the causes of that can come from the health problems that can come from tobacco use. So the list is like forever and ever and ever. But when you're thinking about the lungs, you're looking at all different types of cancers. You're actually looking basically even just acute respiratory issues, high prevalence of pneumonia, bronchitis. All of those are respiratory tract conditions. But that's not exclusive to just tobacco. You actually you can have blood pressure issues, blood sugar issues. If someone is a diabetic, they can have poor blood sugar management, blood sugar control, merely because tobacco use can interfere with how the body uses its own insulin and uses insulin, period, even when you inject yourself with insulin for those that are type 1 diabetic. So it's on the cellular level, there is complications that have been connected with tobacco use. As it in regards to vaping now, vaping has only been around for about 15 years. You know, it came into existence about 2005. It was created in China. And then it became a product that has been mass produced by other vaping companies. So in essence, there's over 460 different types of vaping devices out on the market now. You know, so that alone makes it hard because they're not regulated, meaning we don't know what's in it. So we're finding out situationally what can come from being a vape. I think one of the worst case scenarios I heard, I think it was like a 16 or a 17-year-old, and he needed a double lung transplant. You guys can actually Google this. I don't know the young man's name, but if you Google vape use double lung transplant, teenager, his story will pop up because he actually does speaking engagements. Um, I've heard of people needing a lung. He needed two. So therefore, his lungs had deteriorated so bad, he only used vaping devices for a very short period of time. So unlike with some smokers, you know, you hear some people, oh, I smoked all my life, and you know, now all of a sudden I'm having all these problems. Meaning we're talking years and years and years of use. It seems like with these vaping products that the problems that are coming, it doesn't take a long time for them to occur. Meaning this young man, he might have only been a vapor for less than a year, and he ended up needing a double lung transplant as a teenager. You know, so I use him as an example only because to me that is one of those scenarios that is kind of like mind blowing. I just you can't really wrap your mind around it. But that's the extreme complications that can come from being a vapor, and it messes with the lining of the lungs. And if the linings of the lungs become impaired, then it opens up the door to a host of other issues. And we're finding that more, even though vaping products have not been in the market long, we have heard of it'd be totally different if we didn't hear of any complications. This would even be an issue. But the fact that I've heard of even one issue such as that, and there's been others, but that is just the most visual that I can give you. Because complication wise, we're learning of all popcorn lung. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that. Popcorn lung is a direct connection with the vapor that doesn't necessarily come from smoking, but it's very specific to vapor. So that's something that's a problem. And like I said, we're learning more and more. And I believe in the years to come, we're going to make more connections and more correlations. But to me, it sounds like the vaping complications seem to be more intensified or are more problematic. They're not these little small things. They're huge scenarios and they're happening in young users who may have only used for a certain period of time.
Our generation is well known for its mental health activacy. So, can you tell me some of the effects that smoking has on mental health?
And that's a wonderful question because I'll say sadly in the mental health community, um, tobacco use, vaping use is at an apex. So I remember you were asking me about populations that tend to use products more. Um, I would say the mental health community, they actually, I know I spoke about age groups, but if we had to speak of community, the health, the mental health community, they're high in both of those categories. And for a number of reasons, because a lot of times one of the number one common threads that people actually vape or smoke or both, um, treating anxiety, treating depression, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, um, they almost self-medicate with a tobacco product or with a vape product. So we find that when someone has one, two, or three or more, mental health conditions, um, and they are a tobacco user or vapor, they tend to be the heavier users. Um, the depth of their nicotine dependence seems to be just that much greater because of their mental health conditions that are either being managed or not. So the fact that you guys have that eye on the mental health community, and I think it's good because in this area of talking about tobacco use and vaping, the conversation has to stay on the table in regard to that particular community because they are what we consider a disparate community, meaning we need to always be mindful of, of services that we can potentially offer this community specifically because of the targeting, because of the high prevalence of tobacco use and vaping in those communities. So the effect, when you ask about the effect of mental health, some people can be self-medicating um, their conditions, multiple conditions, um, and therefore they need help, they need support, whether it comes from the psychological community or even from the general practitioner or the general health community, because even though they may self-medicate, it can ultimately impact their physical body, even though they're medicating the mental health aspect of their issues or their situations with the vape or with the cigarette, it could ultimately have a medical impact in a negative way. So I believe it needs to be an all hands on deck approach, whether it's from you guys and supporting and just educating people that there's help out there, or even internally from a healthcare perspective, just offering more intensive, um, more individualized support. As of late, it's been a high level of stress for everyone, over the past year because everything that we thought was is just so different. We have to adapt and adjust to a new way of doing things. And for people who are in the mental health community, they're challenged just that much more. So therefore, we have to be ever mindful to be sensitive to being willing to peel the layers a little bit and acknowledge that this individual or these individuals are going to need just a little bit in this area.
And I encourage any of our viewers that are struggling with mental health, there are better ways to have self-care than to smoke or vape.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miss Mason, for talking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And I'm just thinking that my heart is just overwhelmed with the work that you guys are doing, getting the word out there. And a lot of times people think that, vaping is a healthier substitute for smoking because they hear vegetable glycerol, they hear water vapor, they smell the fruity flavors. So right there, you're thinking water, vegetable, fruits. People don't make the connection that vaping could potentially be harmful to them. And I always tell people, don't treat your body like a human petri dish. Don't try it and wait and see what happens. See what grows. If you're not sure, then it's best to, how we say, don't smoke, don't vape.
Yeah, that's very good message. Don't smoke, don't vape. Thank you once again. And our viewers, follow us on Instagram and like this video.